it seems as if almost everybody has returned, and we will keep talking about the future of translation. For that we have Rihards Kalniņš from Tilde, Latvia, and if there's any questions, just ask later
on. What I'd like to discuss briefly today and talk about is, well, the title of my presentation is The Future of Translation. We heard a lot this morning about the importance of the value of multilingualism in the European Union, the diversity of languages, the importance of maintaining that diversity, but also the resultant linguistic barriers that have evolved between countries. And I think that we can pretty much all agree that the best way to overcome these language barriers, to bridge these divides between languages and between countries, is translation, which has, I'm not sure it's clicking forward. Which has led, or which once led Umberto Eco. Looks like it's skipping forward. Which once led Umberto Eco, the famous Italian novelist and academic, to state that the language of Europe is translation. So that the way that we speak is through translation. Thanks to the interpreters today, I was able to understand the presentations in Estonian. But of course, I think we can all agree that human translation is a very slow process. It's pretty labor-intensive. I'm sure many of you have tried to translate by hand. It takes a long time to master. So what we're talking about today more is automated translation and the way that automated translation can speed up the translation process. Similar to how this presentation is speeding up. I'll try to go back here. So automated translation or machine translation as a method for making the translation process more efficient, for speeding it up, for lowering costs, for lowering the amount of people that are involved, and for really facilitating this exchange of information across borders. So what machine translation has a lot of different applications, a lot of different use cases. The one I'd like to focus on initially is e-commerce, so customer service. MT has the power to engage customers across Europe and the world. By bridging language barriers, companies, organizations are able to speak the language of their users and interact with them seamlessly by bridging language divide. There's a lot of examples of how this is being done today. For most companies that work on a global scale, it's a question of select your location and then choose your language. If you try to scale globally and address customers all over the world, then you need to be able to speak many, many languages. It's been estimated that to reach 80% of the world's population, you need 14 languages on your website. So what are some examples of how this has been in operation recently? Amazon is a big user of machine translation, especially recently. They've been rolling out machine translation in the front end so that users can interact with content in their own native language. As we also heard this morning, there's an overwhelming desire on the part of users to see texts in their own native language, otherwise they won't make actionable decisions. eBay, of course, is another big user of machine translation. They even use MT on sites where customers buy products, so even on the pages where customers are prompted to purchase. And this again underscores the facts already pointed out that people are more apt to purchase if they see something in their native language as opposed to English. Airbnb, which probably many of you use, has also used machine translation to help advertise the various sites and also to allow users to read the reviews in different languages, which I'll point out a little later as well. And then Etsy, another increasingly popular e-commerce site that's based in the United States but has gone global, uses machine translation so that people can post their products that they've made themselves and reach a global audience so they can interact with their customers and speak to them in multiple languages. This is an example of how this works on Etsy. Someone's posted a pair of glasses they're trying to sell, and you can translate, in this case, from French into English, the description of the article. And this is using machine translation. Another great example, which is incredibly important for e-commerce providers, is reviews. Reviews are another way that e-commerce site can advertise its products. People talk about them, not only on the site, but also on social media. And by talking about them, it's a good way to advertise them. So of course, it's a prime scenario for using MT to say, translate this classic frames make for a great look into French, so that a user can see that it's worth buying. So another big use of machine translation is in troubleshooting. So someone comes with a problem. The classic way for an e-commerce site to address that problem is to have someone on staff who answers an email. But these sites have thousands of users. Why not have the users interact with one another to help one another answer questions? So here's an example of someone having a question in French. A user was able to translate it in English and then get involved and answer the question. So it cut costs for the provider. They didn't have to have a huge customer service staff. And it also allowed people to interact and help one another through the purchasing process. Airbnb, people use post reviews of the in this case the product is the space, the apartment that they've rented, and they post it in their own language. But these reviews are really the prime way of seeing whether a property is worth taking or not. I'm sure if some of you have tried Airbnb, that's the first thing you look toward is the reviews. If it has bad reviews, you don't stay there. If it has great reviews, then you can think about it. So this is a way that users can actually see what other people have said about a specific property. So translate reviews to English is using machine translation in Airbnb. So that's a little bit about how MT is being used by e-commerce providers to engage customers. Well, what about citizens? In a sense, the mandates of e-commerce are very similar to e-government. And MT also has a power to engage citizens across Europe, which, as we've seen earlier, is increasingly multilingual. There are now vast number of official languages. And in order to engage citizens on a pan-European scale, European institutions need to be able to speak or to engage in these languages. So what are the goals of e-commerce, or e-government in this case? Increase citizen participation, reach marginalized groups of citizens, expand access to e-services, and engage communities. So very similar to e-commerce. Therefore, not surprisingly, there's been a lot of opportunities for eGov to also use machine translation and reap the benefits of MT to engage citizens across languages. What I'd like to present is a few specific examples of these case studies that our company, Tilde, has worked on over the years in order to provide MT for the Latvian e-government, so just south of the border here. What was the challenge for the Latvian e-government? In Latvia, 36% of the population speaks Russian at home. So a huge challenge was to enable these residents to use the e-services, which were in the official language in Latvian, in a language that they felt comfortable with. Another challenge, very similar to Estonian, even more. So the Latvian language has less than 2 million native speakers. So very few people speak the language globally, as all of you know here in Estonia. So because not many people speak it, it's hard to communicate about what's going on in Latvia, or in this case Estonia, with the rest of the world. But by doing so, we would empower access to information for all residents and all visitors in our respective countries. So these were two challenges that the Latvian government faced. The solution that we proposed, that we've since developed, is a comprehensive, large-scale machine translation service specifically built for the public sector that's also fully integrated into the government platforms, such as the e-services sites that the government uses to interact and engage citizens. In order to build the system, this is sort of more of a technical description, which I'd be happy to talk about in the discussion, but we're able to collect large corpora in Latvian, using all sorts of novel methods, because it is a small language like Estonian, so without readily available language corpora. And using this training data, we're able to add specific terminology that was specific to the public sector, because every sector or domain has its own specific vocabulary or language. So by adding these two together, we were able to build Hugo.lv, which is the machine translation service for Latvia. What it does, in a nutshell, is securely translate text documents and websites, which was also a major priority, obviously, for the government, is to have secure translations. As we've heard, using generic online services like Google Translate, they certainly don't guarantee this data security, so this was of primary importance for the Latvian government, which we were able to meet by hosting it actually on-premise in the government's own infrastructure. The system, of course, is specially adapted for the Latvian language and for public sector texts in the way I explained before, with terminology and by gathering large amounts of data, of language resources in Latvian. And then it was fully integrated into the e-services that citizens already use, as well as into government websites, so that the users of government websites could also see them in multiple languages. In the first phase of the project, we have three systems and 2 language pairs, so Latvian to English, English to Latvian, and then also Latvian to Russian. This is what the online interface looks like. It's freely available to the public, to government employees as well. What you can see in this screenshot is the way in which the system also preserves the formatting of documents. So because it's used to a large extent to translate legislative documents, so what the documents the government deals with, where paginations and formatting and paragraphs are very important, this is also a very important and vital feature of the service to preserve the actual formatting and look of documents when they're translated. It's also integrated into the official e-services portal, which is called latvia.lv, which is a portal that citizens turn to find information about Social Security, disability services, about their pension, social insurance, to find information about various laws. So all their e-government and e-services are guaranteed in this single portal. And it also includes machine translation, so that they can, if a resident of Latvia doesn't speak Latvian, as many of the residents, for example, that have moved there for business don't, they can now use the service. People who speak Russian at home and are more comfortable using Russian can also use the service thanks to machine translation and translating from Latvian to Russian. What they can also do, considering the fact that many users are professionals who work in the different ministries and therefore know very well about the specific types of language that are used in the different documents, is people can suggest different translations if they're not satisfied with the quality levels. So they can suggest a new translation and actually edit the translations right inside the interface. And what this does is helps to improve the translation engines over time as they're used, so that they're constantly getting better and better the more they're used. And they're also getting better and better for the specific types of language that are used on the sites. So in a nutshell, a sort of kind of summary, what Hugo LV, which Tilde developed together with the Latvian government, does is enables multilingual communication in the public sector and empowers access to information and e-services. This has been a great success in Latvia and has quite a few users. It was completed only recently, last year. But the Latvian government had another huge challenge or opportunity last year in 2015, and that was hosting the EU presidency. As I understand, Estonia will be hosting it in 2018, so you will still have that ahead of you. But we completed our presidency. It was 6 months from January to July of 2015. And this was a huge event, and this is something I actually forgot to mention. The systems are actually, the quality levels that we've achieved in HugoLV are better than Google Translate. So I'm kind of always happy to say that our quality is better than Google. So not only more secure and more adapted to the domain, but also we've been able to beat the global giant Google Translate with our translation quality. So yeah, getting back to the systems for the EU presidency, they had a huge opportunity and challenge. 25,000 participants that they expected to receive. 1,600 events, 800 journalists came to Latvia from 40 different countries. A large number of EU policy meetings happening every week, almost every day. And since most of these visitors were coming from all over Europe, language barriers became an issue, and the linguistic challenge became an issue. So the way that we saw that we could help the presidency overcome these challenges is by adapting HugoLV to the EU presidency. So we analyzed specific EU presidency texts to get the right terminology, and we taught the MT to use these various terms that were used frequently in EU affairs and in EU presidency affairs in the right inflectional forms, which is also a challenge for MT, but something that we've been working on, specifically, or even more true again for Estonian, morphologically rich language. So this was a challenge that we were able to work on, and we adapted the system for use in the presidency. But of course, the presidency had slightly different needs than the Latvian government for their MT service. So what we did was we designed a desktop application so that people coming to Latvia could download a desktop app on their computers and use it to translate documents, so press releases, different government websites that they were looking at and trying to analyze for their own, for news reports, for instance. We built a mobile app, of course, so that people could have access to this right on their mobile phones. And then we built actually a physical translation kiosk at the headquarters of the presidency, which if any of you had the opportunity to attend events last year in Riga, you have seen was the National Library, so the brand new Latvian National Library on the banks of the Daugava River had a pair of these translation kiosks so people would actually translate, walk up to it and take care of their translation needs. This is what the desktop app looked like. It was a very simple, intuitive interface. People were able to download it and then install it on their computers, translate texts, full documents, so like I said, press releases, government forms that they were analyzing, and also websites. So websites were particularly popular because many of the journalists, for example, were writing reports about what was going on in Latvia while they were here. And obviously the Latvian websites, Latvian news portals don't have translations in English, so they were to use the site to, or use a desktop app to translate websites into English and read what was going on that day in Latvia. So it was freely available for everyone and downloaded at the site. This is what it looked like. It was also installed on all the computers at the headquarters of the EU presidency, so journalists could use it. And of course, the mobile app was extremely popular during the course of the presidency. So this was the headquarters that I mentioned, the Latvian National Library. And the kiosk is a particular example I like to draw attention to because it's a great example of translation as a utility. So what I mean by that is that translation is almost like a basic, we at least view it as a basic service that everyone should be entitled to. And by providing it in a physical form, it accentuates the role of translation as a basic utility because it makes it easier to use. People simply walk up and translate. They don't even need a computer to do that. So they're able to cross the language barrier much more fluidly and easily thanks to this translation kiosk. This is what it looked like in the media center where journalists gathered to write their reports and drink coffee and hang out. It was actually the object of various news reports. He was an Italian journalist who prepared actually a piece about this. And was able to use it as well to read websites before her interviews with people from the Latvian government. And it was also upstairs on the very first floor by the main doors of the Latvian National Library, so that anyone who came in could do something like translate a press release, translate information that they needed. They could instantly, as we like to say, unlock the Latvian language. That's why we have this key, or had this key as the official logo, because it was used as a tool to unlock Latvian for all those who didn't understand it. Yeah, and here's another journalist from Italy who was about to do an interview with the mayor of Latvia, so about municipal Latvian affairs that he didn't have access to otherwise in English. So he was able to do his homework, see what the mayor had been talking about that day, and prompt him to ask all kinds of difficult questions that certainly surprised the mayor to know that the Italian journalists knew about the latest news of the day. The crowning event of the EU presidency last year was the Digital Assembly, which took place also in the National Library building and gathered quite a few very high-level members of the European Commission, including various commissioners, and multilingualism became a huge topic of debate, thanks in no small part also to the translation kiosk and the machine translation service. In fact, it became such a large part of the discussion that Robert Madeline, who was the former head of DG Connect and now the Chief Innovation Officer in the European Commission, went so far as to say in his opening speech that there will be no digital single market without multilingualism, as few people feel comfortable operating in their second or third language. And he went on at great length to discuss the value that tools and technologies like machine translation can bring to both guaranteeing multilingualism, allowing multilingualism to thrive, and also cross language barriers between nations. He also included it as an essential element that's necessary for the take-up of an inclusive digital single market, which is still a top priority of the European Commission, and mentioned increased consideration for language diversity, and by extension, increased consideration for the tools that can help overcome, and language diversity as a major priority for Europe and a major priority for uniting Europe in a single digital single market. We also received word following the event that Hugo LV, the Latvian public sector's machine translation service, was nominated for a World Summit Award in eGov category, which we were very proud of in 2015, which was a nice way to crown our work and acknowledge that these automated translation tools that we've been developing been recognized as enabling technologies for not only multilingualism in Europe, but also in the world. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Go ahead.
Imagine your mobile phone is using a concept of carry away heating place. Can you translate this back to normal language, please? Carry away heating place. You cannot. The English term is the Wi-Fi hotspot, and it's translated into Estonian like kaasaskantav kuum koht. And this is the normal quality for Samsung phones. Which is the language you personally use for your mobile phone, Latvian or English?
Me personally, for my mobile phone. Well, there's Latvian and English on it. I'm sure that, like many of you, we have multiple languages that we speak in, and therefore also multiple languages on our interfaces. But you bring up a good example, because I think that machine translation, the one way of looking at it is through quality. But I think that...
Sorry, this is not machine translation. This is the human translation. And the problem is that Samsung phones are very popular in Estonia, right, and the translation quality, which tens of thousands people use, is relatively low, and the young people are learning those examples. The problem with Estonian automated translation is that the result is it's ridicule. It's real ridicule. I would propose an experiment for people who know several languages. Please go to Google Play. It's the App Store. Please choose the language as Estonian, and please see the description of software packages in Estonian language. And then estimate what's the level of how much you understood what this package is doing, and to what extent you estimate that the description was absolutely ridicule, abnormal. I would say that in 70% of cases you don't understand, or you are laughing because it's ridicule. And now the actual question is, what do you think? Should we use only euphemisms like morphologically rich language and better and so on, or should there be any basic level, baseline, which a translation should never fall through? Is it any acceptable level for the translation, or we should suffer from those ridicule translations? That's the reason why my command language for my phones and computers is English and will remain English, because I don't want to see the obscene citations on my walls. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, is there an accepted level of quality that should be maintained? I think the answer is, well, it depends on what you want to do with the text. Some texts, of course, you look to quality and publishability, but other times, texts, you just want to get a general idea of them in order to take an actionable decision. And I think that the answer is, well, it's not a good answer because that's usually what people don't want to hear, but it depends on how you're using the text. I think that not all texts are alike. I mean, certainly for your interface on your mobile phone, if it's human translated and you see these errors, I mean, certainly that's not acceptable. But for other cases where you see texts and they're maybe not perfect, but they're enough in order to get a general understanding and make a decision, if the translation was supplied quickly and instantly with absolutely no cost, then probably that's something that you could let them get away with.
Yet another question. Do you speak any non-Indo-European language?
Personally, no, I do not.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure if that was a right or wrong answer. But
Sorry. One question. You mentioned that you auto-translated legal acts for the EU session or whatever.
That's right.
I wanted to ask, is there an institution like a sworn translator in Latvia or not?
I mean, I see where this question is getting. I mean, certainly the legal acts that were translated using these tools were not translated to be a publishable quality that would then be legally applicable. They were translated in order for the user to get a general sense of what the text was about. And in fact, this is also a great way to filter texts. I mean, if you had to have a human translator translate everything in your research, say, about a legal issue, that would be an incredibly expensive and labor-intensive effort, and surely, probably most of the documents wouldn't even be necessary. But if you machine translate those documents, you can quickly see what you should translate by a human then, and what the documents are approximately saying. So I think the tools, the key word is they're tools. They're ways to get an understanding of a text. Certainly, machine translation doesn't purport to substitute human translators. They're tools to actually help the tasks of human translators. And this is actually how machine translation is used in localization or in the translation industry itself. These are tools that can help speed up the process of translation. But certainly, I mean, as you know, in cases where you need a perfect translation, a human should always be looking things over to make sure they're good.
Excuse me, Lori Kren, aviation community. In your slide, you mentioned that you teached or pushed your Hugo system to better understand semantics and context when translating something automatically. This is currently the biggest problem I see because, for example, even in human translation, EURLEX directives, whatever, usually there is strong mistakes because the translator was not understanding the correct context and translated then wrongly. Example, I have worked in aviation terminology more than 20 years. If in English is one term or three, if there is a different terms for British, American, and international English, then depending on context, we have at least six terms in Estonia to choose. Now we need software which detects automatically the context or which domain it is and associates the correct translation, and other shall be blacklisted. For example, this term which is on first place in agriculture is never on first place in aviation.
Right.
Where you can find such kind of translation memory? Excuse.
Right. You're right. I mean, vocabularies or terminologies are very domain specific. What a term that applies in one domain certainly doesn't apply in another domain. The word custom means one thing when we're talking about culture and quite something different when we're talking about transport. This is usually where translation gets into problems. The nice thing about machine translation is you can teach a machine all kinds of things, whereas a human might get confused. Yeah. I already hear someone shaking their head, but machines can be taught, and right. Well, the question of whether or not a human or a machine can get confused about things. Certainly, humans have the advantage of seeing context and of understanding context and semantics and looking at broader issues. But for example, would you want a human translator to be translating a very specific type of document if they weren't specialized in that domain? Machines can be taught to translate in a specific domain by adding things like that domain-specific terminology. But again, I mean, just to repeat myself, we're certainly not purporting that machine translation can replace human translation. It's a tool to help productivity, to speed up productivity, and to also lower costs, which are huge challenges, and that machines and translation can assist in this. Go ahead.
Just one more question. In what way do you think that your technology, the automatic translation, is superior to a good translation memory as for consuming, for saving time and so on, whatever?
Right. Well, translation memory, I mean, this is from the language of professional translation or localization, means that you've seen you've translated this document or this sentence before, and it can give you an exact match. Machine translation is the next step. It can look, and it's not just an exact match, but it can also reorder things. It looks at context. Right. Machine translation in a localization process is sort of the next step beyond a translation memories. They're able to more flexibly look at documents and provide a larger variety of possible translations. That's why it's a tool that's used by localization all over the world, all the major localization companies, in order to speed up the productivity workflow, along with translation memories. But that's good. I think these questions are good. I mean, it's always a good debate. I think that by pushing the envelope, by trying to push technology forward, obviously there's going to be a lot of questions, and I think that's a good thing. There should be questions around them. But I think a lot of the case studies really speak for themselves about the way that both governments, huge global companies have been using machine translation.
The sad problem with Estonian language is that the quality of automation translation is laughable, ridiculous. And the problem is that the European Union is not recognizing this problem. EU is ignoring this problem because, I don't know, maybe being afraid of nationality, nationalism, whatever. But there are very strong problems with Estonian language. I have communicated with translators working in Luxembourg for DG, and all they, without any exemption, say that it's easier to do this manually. And so far, we see the situation where for major languages, translators are saving time by means of those tools, but Estonian translators are not. Yes, of course, they have terminology bases and they have some example sentences, but nevertheless they spend their time on special cases. They are not winning the time. So I am afraid certain languages are special case, and I think European Union should recognize the problem, not to ignore this.
Yeah.
This is actually why I am here today.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Well, I can, from my side, confirm, because I used to work for the Finnish language department for over 15 years, that there are, in the Finnish language department at least, there are colleagues who do use the raw machine translation as a basis. There are people who prefer to work that way. There are others who don't like it at all, but others who sort of get the first grasp of the text with this. And this is offered to them nowadays. Each time there's a new translation work to be done, they are offered this possibility. Of course, they are not forced to use it, but I would say also that this increases also awareness of the tool, and also interest and, let's say, willingness to improve the system. So we shouldn't be too negative about this, and I think Finnish is very much in the same
Yeah, I think
line as
I mean, you're exactly right. It's Estonians, as is Finnish. Though these are big cases. These are very difficult languages, recognized all over Europe as being extremely difficult. And this is particularly why we need to keep working on them. Latvian is no easy language itself either, but we've made great strides. We're also working on Estonian. This is precisely why the effort needs to be continued, and more needs to be put into it. It's certainly a process, and in process, and work is being put into it precisely because of this. Because Estonian, even though it's complex, also deserves these tools.
Sorry, I would like to make a small remark in support of you. Basically, yes, and we well know that Finnish is far advanced compared to us if we are talking about automated translation. But there is one very good reason for it. Finland has been a EU member for a far longer time than Estonia. And the whole corpus of EU law was translated over a very short period of time by very unexperienced translators. So if we would like to start creating a basis for automated translation here in Estonia, then we would have to start manually revising the EU legislation of the earlier years in order to create a tool that the automated analysis can use to any good extent.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. That's why we're doing it. I mean, it's a challenge and an opportunity.
Yes, I agree that you are, let's say, we were where you are now a few years ago, so we are more advanced. And we had plenty of problems in the beginning when we had to translate the full acquis communautaire very quickly, and there were, let's say, improvements we did need to work on the first versions. But there is also a so-called normative memory that was developed in the Commission in order to flag those segments that are the ones that have to be used, which are the correct ones, which come on top of all the other suggestions, because you may have like 10 suggestions for the same, yes. And also terminology work is rather advanced now in the Finnish language department, and it's extremely important as well. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for all the questions. I'd be happy to continue these discussions. I think they're great discussions and important issues, and that's what we're here to discuss. So glad to hear these questions. Thank you very much.